Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're looking specifically at deposit finance funding options on UK investment property. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark McAllister, and I'm Senior Partner for Holborn Assets based here in Cape Town. And we've been helping returning South Africans and South Africans in South Africa to diversify into the best investments globally, including obviously investment property. Please feel free to connect with myself on all of the social media channels that you see on screen now, so that you can receive the very latest updates on what you should know when deciding where to make your investment property decisions in the future. I'm also joined by my colleague, Matthew Hogarth. I'll be introducing Matthew shortly. He's one of our UK and European property specialists. So he really knows his stuff and able to help all sorts of clients globally around investment property decisions. Matthew will introduce you shortly. There is a section at the end for answering questions, and I'd request that you utilize the Q&A button. For those that haven't used Zoom's webinar before, you'll find it at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type any questions in now, and then we'll collate those questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them as we get towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so let me introduce our panel speakers for today. So as I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague, Matthew Hogarth. Matthew is our Senior Associate specializing in property around the whole world, but particularly on this discussion about UK investment property. And then also Udal Spence. Udal is a Senior Territory Manager from Prosperity Wealth. We're very fortunate to have about a panel of about 12 different property partners providing coverage across the whole of UK and Europe. But Udal and the team at Prosperity offer us a unique solution around deposit finance funding, and something that Udal will be explaining to us today. So good afternoon, Matthew. Good afternoon, Udal. Thanks very much for joining us today. How are you both?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Thanks for including me on the webinar. Good afternoon, Udal. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar.
Thank you, guys.
Great stuff. Okay, let's get started. So to give you some background about our company by way of introduction, for those who didn't attend one of our previous webinars, Holborn Assets is the second largest independently owned financial global advisory business, and we've been around since about 1998. We manage and administrate nearly $3 billion of liquid funds for about 20-odd thousand clients in about 30 different countries, from offices in 11 different territories. Now, we specialize in helping particularly expats with their finances, and that includes those that have worked in the UK wanting to resettle into their home countries like South Africa, as well as helping South Africans diversify their wealth globally. So in South Africa, we have offices in Johannesburg, Durban, Winelands, and obviously Cape Town, which is where I am the senior partner for the group. Now, before we get started, on screen now, probably the top questions that we get asked about, particularly on the UK property investment front, and easy to answer when we deal with these sort of things all the time, but may still be something that you're not sure about. So things like, how do I get a mortgage, or maybe even remortgage, that property in Southwest 19 that you've had for 20 odd years? What loan to values or interest rates can I expect as a expat or a South African, depending on what territory you're in? And how do I ensure a high rate of occupancy? How do I make sure that my property isn't vacant and has sufficient tenants in place? Is now the time to invest in UK property, particularly post-Brexit and post-COVID? There's a lot of questions being asked. Is this the right time to invest in property? And what are the investment hotspots of the future? What does our crystal ball tell us about where we should be thinking about putting clients' money? And what is the deposit required on a UK property? And this is probably why you're here today or listening to this recording, is there an option to also finance that deposit so you can actually acquire investment property in the UK, perhaps a bit sooner than you were previously budgeting? Okay. So why would you even consider owning an investment property, you may ask? Well, I'm a firm believer in investment property, and given the Robert Kiyosaki mantra, which we'll get to at a later stage during the webinar, I'll hand them over to Matthew in a bit to explain that. You may have heard of plenty of examples where friends or colleagues have established investment properties over the years. Some have even made millions in property. Now, the reason is because one of the few assets that around the world where you can actually borrow other people's money to multiply your growth and profits in something that is as safe as houses. Today, we're going to show you how you can double your money in property. But before that, we have to look at where in the world you would consider investing. And to answer that question, is the UK the best property investment case, and what should influence your thinking? I'm now going to bring Matthew in, our senior partner that specializes in property, and let him talk you through what he feels currently is the best in class and where you should be thinking. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the introduction. So, now myself and Mark, we've obviously been fortunate enough to have one of the largest expat client bases in South Africa. Now, there really are two types of expats we help with overseas investments. Firstly, Brits and other expats live in Africa, but a lot of really South Africans who went to the UK maybe in the late 90s or 2000s and then came back home. But that's not what I really mean by this slide. Now, I have two types of clients in relation to primary currency investment property. The first group are those who lived and worked abroad in places like the UK and kept their property to rent out. And the second group of those are those who basically wish they had and instead brought their money back here into South Africa. But South African property is better, right? Now, it's really good asset class and a fantastic investment. But admittedly, in the last couple of years, it hasn't done too well. And we unpack the facts with data, as you can see the true comparison on the global scale, opposed to UK as opposed to the South African property. Now, if we have two countries to consider, what we must first look at is understanding the journey of the two currencies. So, over the last 40 years, this is a slide showing the devaluing of the rand. So over the last 40 years, you can see the rand is really depreciated to the pound, where it used to be 1.8 in 1980 to the pound. It's now sitting at 20 rands to the pound. So basically an underlying trend is only going on in that one direction. Now, in the last 40 years, you would have suddenly realized that it's depreciated by about 1,200% or 5% per annum. Now, to put that in comparison, in 1980, a million rand would have bought you 540,000 pounds. Now, in today's terms, that same million rand will only get you about 48,000 pounds. So there's really a misconception about the depreciation when it comes to the Zuma years. But if you take it on a scale of the last 40 years, it's depreciated, as I said, by 5% per annum. Now, obviously, the picture is really identical when it comes to the US dollar. Now, with credit downgrades, bailouts, corruption, it's therefore something relatively reasonable to assume that the rand will continue to really go on a downward trajectory to the primary currencies. And that's obviously the dotted line shown in the figure. Now, the question you really have to ask yourself is, are we getting better, or are the worst years still yet to come? Now, it's my gut feel, given the current slide, that it only can get a little bit worse, but we'll talk about investment property in primary currency going forward. Okay, so obviously everyone knows about Brexit. Now, let's try and benchmark average property value. So the dark line that you can see in the slide is the average UK house price in GBP. The lighter line is the average South African house price converted into GBP at the appropriate exchange rate of the time. Now, the red line shows what happened after Brexit, and it's a common misconception that surely the market went down, but as you can see, quite simply, not really. UK prices haven't really missed a beat and continued to rise from the structural undersupply in the small island, as you know, that you used to call home, Mark. Now, simply, they aren't making any more land given this undersupply. So onto the next slide. Let's try and flip it onto the Rand or ZAR equivalent. Now, what you can see is pretty much the same story with the odd opportunity to take advantage of the relatively strong Rand post-Brexit, for example, before trends really continued. So really effectively, South Africans can buy UK property at a discount on the trend thanks to Brexit. I suppose we can thank David Cameron for that. But the overall story really remains. A high inflation economy and relatively large space can outpace a low inflation, safe haven asset, primarily like the UK, where we're going to look at primary investment property. Okay. Now, this slide is rather interesting. So if not South Africa, or particularly the Rand, where should we be looking at our investment property opportunity? Now, as a wealth and investment manager, we need to consider and filter all options around the world. So let's imagine we zoom out into the slide in a Google Earth scenario, map style of the world, okay? Now, let's create some filter questions to really decide where you want to invest. So our first stop is to talk about currency, as I previously mentioned, as we need to already sort of protect ourselves from inflation and devaluing currency. So the only option really is to consider primary level currencies, the pound sterling, US dollar, euros, maybe to an extent the Swiss franc, Aussie dollar, Canadian dollar, or New Zealand dollar for that matter. But simply put, if your currency starts with the letter R, so I'm talking rands, rubles, rupees, it's discarded as an option in this case. So it kind of narrows it down. Okay, so what we left in the Google Maps is something that looks like this. So we've got North America, we've got Europe, we've got Australia and New Zealand. Okay. Now, the next 2 points are closely linked by the government of the day in that country that you're looking at. So firstly, if there's a risk of expropriation, whether it's with or without compensation, much like South Africa, that's a no-go. So we prefer to only invest in properties where the government really protects the property ownership rights. So this knocks out some left-leaning or socialist governments, maybe places like Spain, where they recently expropriated a whole beachfront in Marbella, for example. Now, linked with that, will you basically, as a foreign landlord, be taxed any more, any less favorably than if you were based in that country? So if so, we'd rather obviously focus on destinations that attract overseas investors without any taxation barriers to entry, okay? So what does that leave us with? Now, the 3 simple questions on the Google map have really narrowed it down to 4 countries, okay? Now, these are Portugal, the Republic of Ireland, the UK, and Germany. I mean, if we look at land investment opportunities, I would include the USA, but that's probably a separate conversation for another time. Now, as you can see, primary focus is on owned and rented investment property in Western Europe, and 3 offer euro-based and 1 offers pound sterling-based assets, which is obviously perceived to be undervalued at the moment, given Brexit. And then obviously we need to narrow it down from those 4 countries you've looked at. And now you look at obviously the old age property investment trick. Now, can you follow and try and preempt infrastructure spend? So where is the biggest infrastructure spend out of those 4 countries? Okay. Whether it was the man who stood in a windy field in West London, for example, that's now Heathrow Airport, or the Docklands that have now turned into the financial hub of Canary Wharf. Property investment always follows infrastructure spend. Now, the main gains made by those who invested in the Crossrail, for example, across London, have seen significant gains in recent years. So my logical question here is, where's the biggest infrastructure spend in Europe or the UK that overlaps into any of those countries? Okay. And that is the answer to that is the £106 billion behemoth that's the high-speed rail between London and the Northern Powerhouse. Right now, South Africans have the opportunity to be in a leading-edge investment by looking at properties in the Northern Powerhouse. So let me put that into context. Mark, I know you're originally from a place in Surrey, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm from A town called Guildford, which if anyone's been there, if they're male, they'll remember the high street for aching calves. If they're female, they'll remember the high street for the shops. But yes, I'm from Guildford in Surrey.
Okay, Mark, I mean, on that question, do you know what sort of the average house price is on a 2-bedroom apartment there at the moment?
Yeah, look, Matthew, I mean, I've been a landlord, both commercial and residential, all my life. It was drilled into me like many Brits to own property. So yeah, I know exactly the answer to this question. A 2-bedroom flat in Guildford would cost somewhere around about £400,000 for a 2-bedroom flat at the moment. Okay,
perfect. And you know why that is, Mark? Why it would cost that?
Well, I mean, part of it is its proximity to London, right? You jump on the train, you're part of the commuter belt into the city. So £400,000 for a 2-bedroom flat. And that's somewhere around about 45 minutes on the train from London.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, once high-speed rail is in place, a 2-flat in Birmingham, which we can see is going to take sort of 45 minutes, that's now worth £250,000 or £275,000 per se, will be the same travel time, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an hour and a half on the train at the moment. So when high-speed rail is in place, yeah, I mean, it's going to be 40, 50 minutes. So it's almost, the one way of looking at it is Birmingham, the first stop on the high-speed rail line. It's almost going to be like a suburb of London, So yeah, it's a reasonable assumption.
Okay, perfect. But I'm not saying that properties in Birmingham are going to be worth £400,000. But I mean, let's assume maybe £325,000, £350,000. Is that a reasonable assumption to make? You think?
Yeah, I mean, if you're buying a 2-bed flat and it's close to a transport node like Curzon Street Station or the interchange, somewhere like that, then yeah, I mean, if it's £250,000 now, give it 6-7 years, is it going to be worth north of £350,000? Yeah, it's a reasonable assumption to make. I don't think we're out of order.
I mean, it'll take you longer to commute from the northern suburbs to the centre of town in Cape Town than from Birmingham to London.
Well, I live in Somerset West, so I try to.
Well, even longer for you.
Yeah. Well, this is maybe another point that's interesting, Matt, right? Lots of people don't understand how important the train system is in the UK if you've never been there. It's not like the train system down here where, like I took the business train from Somerset West once. It's one train a day. If you're in the southeast of England, there's hundreds of trains going in, and everybody that works in the city goes via train. They don't go by car. I mean, some people do, obviously, some people drive in, but the vast majority go on public transport. So it's a different mindset, a different economy, a different system.
I guess I suppose your safety is something to be concerned about, catching the train from Somerset West, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would only have gone on the business train, and I only did it for a week before I gave up. It was late every day. So
okay.
Anyway, so carry on.
All right, fantastic. Well, obviously, as Mark mentioned, now we're on to the biggest property investors trick. Now, something I'm sure you will have heard of, and which is, obviously used to multiply your gains using other people's money. Now, this concept was obviously made famous by Rich Dad, Poor Dad, written by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, he is a huge fan of investment property and using leveraged or mortgages, the equivalent of a bond in the UK, to multiply your profits and your growth. So, I mean, let's look at this slide. So let's say that we found something that makes the best investment case for property ownership globally. And let's take two brothers, for example, who decide to buy identical properties. Let's say, for example, a £250,000 property in Birmingham. So obviously, if you've read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, pretty much the punchline in that book is how to grow your wealth using other people's money. And in this case, we'll basically illustrate it quite clearly. So let's take investor A, or the first brother. He decides to pay for the property £250,000 in cash. It then grows to be worth £325,000 in 6 years' time. And he's made a profit of £75,000. But let's not forget that he rented it out for £12,000 a year, which accumulates to about £72,000 over that 6-year period. So he's made a profit of £147,000 or 58.8% return on his investment, which is pretty good, right? But let's now look at brother B, who decides to leverage that investment. He puts down 30%, which is £75,000, and borrows money from a UK bank, which is obviously currently at the lowest interest rates in history for the rest. Now, the same growth applies, and he uses the money to pay for the rent money to pay for the mortgage, So his profit is £75,000 on that initial investment of £75,000, or 100% return on his investment. So if you ever wondered really how people become millionaires through property investment, this is how it's done. And obviously you could too going forward. Now, what is the difference? One of the questions that I ask is whether to buy something off plan or completed. So what are the differences between a completed versus an off plan property? Now, let's assume you purchase an off plan property that completes in 2 years. Let's take the same scenario with the leveraged property in the previous slide. On a £250,000 property, we put down £75,000 as a deposit. Essentially, you're locking in a price now for a property that will complete and grow in value over the next 2 years. So assuming 5% capital appreciation per year, your £250,000 property will have appreciated by £25,000 in that 2-year period, or a 33% return on investment before it's even completed. Now, obviously, admittedly, a 30% deposit may seem quite daunting to some who may not really have sufficient cash reserves to pay for the deposit. But really, what if there were options available to fund this deposit over a certain period? And now this is where I'd obviously like to bring in Udal, who will talk you through the available options.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was lovely, much appreciated. So Prosperity Wealth. So we are a residential property developer based in Birmingham, and we like to feel that our USPs and our product and our offerings that we offer our clients are truly unique to the marketplace, where we are able to unlock a whole new audience of clients that have the aspirations to invest in city centre locations, but don't have the knowledge or the products to do so. So Prosperity's product really kind of plugs that gap and gives people the opportunity to get into great city centre opportunities where there is great regeneration stories happening. We have something called a no lump sum deposit offering. So when we've got, for instance, a 200k property in the city centre of Birmingham, as Matthew mentioned earlier on, sometimes it is quite daunting knowing that the buy-to-let mortgage deposit on that is something like the 30 to 35%, which we are looking around about 60 to 70,000 pounds. As a developer, because of our sites and how we position the sites, they are fully funded. So we have our own private equity and all the different processes that we go through to make sure that the sites are fully funded before we've even started to attract investors in so they can invest with their buy-to-let investment journey. So we are able to offer them a no lump sum unique payment plan where they can put as low as a 5% reservation deposit of the purchase price. So for example, £200,000 property, 5% reservation deposit to secure and freeze that headline value of that property price today and that pounds per square foot. Now, typically Prosperity, the way we work, because it's an off-plan model, exactly how Matthew was explaining earlier on, we would give a development timeline, typically between 2 and 2.5 years for the construction of the build to take place from start to finish. We understand this period. We're going to be giving clients every single quarter, so every quarterly 3 months of the development timeline. We'll provide the clients and the investors and the partners an introducer and client update on the progression and the timeline of the project. So it's a bit like you're contributing as a payment plan towards your investment property, but also seeing it grow in front of your eyes, which creates a very much transparent relationship and buying journey from us and the clients. So how we do that, so typically it's a 5% reservation deposit to secure the unit of choice. We know that the structure and the buy-to-let mortgage deposit structure is around about the 30% mark. So we kind of put out a payment plan, which is called 30/70. Your 5% booking fee is a part of that 30% deposit. The remaining of the 30%, which is 25, is then split across the remaining 2 years of that launch project's timeline for that specific site. So if we are due to complete quarter 4, 2023, 24 months away, each and every month, you can make a monthly installment of that 25% deposit to contribute towards building your buy-to-let mortgage deposit up, interest-free, up to completion. So now what this has done is given investors the opportunity to get into a fantastic story like Birmingham that maybe never had 50, 60,000 pounds sitting in the bank accounts, but they can afford to do 1,800 pounds, 2,000 pounds a month as a regular savings towards bricks and mortar. And that's the way we like to unlock these opportunities and help people, save towards property and unlock these kind of opportunities as well. When we reach completion, thanks Matthew, we have a process then that then goes into the mortgage side. So we have a mortgage process where you do a qualification process, and that's your 70% loan to value that will then complete up on the back end. Usually, typically for buy-to-let mortgages, it's usually the interest only rate, and then obviously the rental income will cover that moving forward. So that's the kind of structure of the 30/70 payment plan. We do typically have these kind of example breakdowns just to show people how unique and how easy it is for you to obviously get into something like this. One of the things that I always highlight is as well, when we're helping clients, place that 5% reservation deposit in that reservation stage, you've locked in this top headline value, which is, as Matthew was saying earlier, land values and capital appreciation and infrastructure is always progressing. So these spikes are always growing. So you're going to be seeing a level of growth on the headline value of 200K or 179K over this 2-year period, while you're making the littlest as possible monthly commitments, but getting a big return compared to the capital employed at the end, which is amazing. So not only are you drip feeding the most minimal commitments into the payment plan, you're getting to see the progression of the bill take place in front of your eyes, but also you're headlining and capital appreciating on the headline value that you would never have seen those levels of growth, even if you had 50, 60,000 pounds sitting in your bank account in a high interest account or whatever you do. Moving into the monthly deposit installment schedule. As you can see, the total deposit here for this one is 53,000. We break that down into a monthly installment of 24 months. That's your contribution, and as I said before, it is completely interest free. So it's a way that we kind of position our deals. Because of our sites are fully funded, we are able and can afford to offer the investors the opportunity to drip feed and build their deposit up to completion stages and when we're handing over. And then the other parts are just understanding the income levels and the expenses and all the other things that will come into play when you do eventually own the property outright. And this is one of the significant things why we say, buying off plan is that investment vehicle, using that tool to maximize on the growth. Because as like Matthew was saying earlier, if you was to go out and position yourself in like a completed market, you completely wash away the off-plan window where you're going to see the level of growth, because all of a sudden you've ran into the expenses of running the property straight away. So it's going to take you a little bit longer to kind of accrue that value add that you would have seen doing it the off-plan model. So that's the typical kind of 30/70 model of Prosperity's cash in mortgage offering that we do. No lump sum, 5% reservation deposit, 25% then spread across our existing payment plan term. You don't have to do a monthly installment if you don't want to. You're more than happy to do a quarterly installment. So if you feel that you want to do 8 payments of the entire term, which is a quarterly payment, you can do so. But the monthly installment plan really works well with a lot of clients around the world. Secondly, we have another payment plan which is completely unique to Holborn, and we kind of position this product as We call this the regular savings plan for property. So how this typically works, where we had the cash and mortgage deal, which is 30/70, we flip it around, and this one is called the 70/30. So how this works is there's no credit checks involved, no mortgage involved, and no interest rates involved. And you're probably thinking, this is too good to be true. But this is our Prosperity's own payment plan, and we've designed it, and it's worked really well over the 17 developments we've done through the non-mortgage offering since we've been doing this site. So typically your no lump sum offering stands again. So we've got an example here of a £76,000 property, 995. You place a 5% reservation deposit to secure that unit of choice. So we're locking in that price today. We've reserved with a 5% reservation deposit. Then usually 3 to 4 weeks later, you'll start your first month's installment of 65%. So remember, this time we are building a 70% deposit up to completion, 5% res, and then your 65% deposit plan is paid into monthly installments, which mirrors the build period of that project. So again, we'll be including you in development update webinars where you get to see the DM office present the scheme and understanding of the progression of the shops, etc. So we take you on a journey alongside the progress of the site. So it's very transparent. When we then arrive at completion, we find that now Mr. Investor has paid 70% of his balance of the property price into the deposit pots. We understand there's still a 30% of the purchase price that's still outstanding. So what we do as a developer at this stage is we step in as a developer, and we say, right, to the conveyancers, we're going to fund this remaining 30% balance for the clients so they can legally complete. So you'll get, the clients will legally complete in the normal process. Legal deeds, land registry, everything will all go into their names as normal process, handover complete. We then instruct, we have a rental management company that's compulsory, that's on the back end of the deal, that sits down to kind of find and sources the perfect secured profile tenant to move into this property. When we found the perfect profile tenant that then moves in, we have a rental repayment stage that you can just see here at the bottom, where you've got year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So this rental repayment stage, for example, is £6,600 per annum. We would collect that in from the rental management team then to pay Prosperity back the outstanding balance of 30% that we funded at completion, and that's completely interest-free. So what we found is we've got a product now what we've unlocked for people that can invest into UK property, initially from reservation, including your off-plan building stage through to your 3 to 4 years of rental repayment. You can become a 100% property, UK property, unencumbered owner in less than 6.5 years from reservation. I always say that this property and this kind of offering, because it's got a 0 interest rate and there's no mortgage or credit checks applications attached to it, it's just a fantastic solution. So if I'm an investor, for instance, and I'm planning to retire in the next 7 years, and I find that Prosperity are offering a product that's 1 year away from completion, and then maybe we've got another one that's 2 or 3 years, I could potentially own 2 or 3 properties that are going to be income producing assets for life. I've never paid a mortgage or interest rate on, and they're my properties that I can hold, retain, exit, pass down. I can do whatever I want with them as a pension alternative. Just some of the other benefits. So it's open to first-time buyers of all ages, expatriates, foreign nationals, countries that are exempt from UK mortgages. It's not a credit check. Yeah. You might find that some of the buy-to-let mortgages in the UK offer a ceiling when it comes to the age, if you're retired, etc. Again, it's open to all investors. So if this is something that kind of ticks the boxes for you, then definitely speak with Matthew and Mark, and they'll be able to talk to you about the right path and the right direction, how we can help.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dale. That was very comprehensive and straight on the money. So thank you for such an insight. And what a fantastic solution you guys have put together. I mean, there's so many South Africans that we talk to on a regular basis that love property. They're just scared off potentially by the high entry point. We often get that message, God, if only we could contribute, an amount every month, and this price point is sitting somewhere in the sort of 40, 50,000 rands a month. It's still big numbers, but it's not nearly as big as, 2 million rand or whatever as a deposit. So it allows you to spread your risk. So thanks for presenting that so well. So we're going to move on to the Q&A section now. So if you haven't already done so, if you've been thinking about a question that you'd like to get clarified by either Matthew or you, Dale, please type it on the Q&A now and ping it up. Obviously, if you're on WhatsApp, feel free to WhatsApp either myself or Matthew, and we can try and answer some of those questions now. So one of the first questions I got from one of my clients on WhatsApp, so I'll start off with this one. So thank you, Steve, for sending this through. He just wanted to ask a question. Is there interest charged on the outstanding deposit or the balance during the term? How's that worked out, Dale? Or is it, you mentioned interest rate? Is that?
Yeah, of course. So what we do is, because we've the contract price of the property is the price that we would have exchanged on and the price that we've agreed in the title deeds of the initial point of contract, point of sale for the deal. So if, for instance, the property is 99,995, that's the price of the product. We then structure a 70% payment plan that covers off the 70% of that. When we come to the 30% that's remaining, one of the great things that we haven't also included in the pot is, we know that the 30% will always stay the amount, because it's a deed of assignment that comes from the rental income. So we can only collect it from the rental income as an income producing property. However, it's always an interest-free 0% developer funding, and that's the structure. If we find on that financial, we've kind of forecasted, £6,500 per annum for the next 4 years. We haven't typically kind of factored in rental increases or rental growth. So all of a sudden, if year 2, for instance, the rentals went up to £7,200, we know that then the rental repayment period will obviously be shortened, because we'll be collecting in more rental income. But as the client exchanges and completes with their deeds, all of the outstanding balance and the details will be all written in the deed and written in the deal, of course. So they'll get that as a legal document, which is very transparent and good for them to understand.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that. A couple of questions now coming in. So this one's from Chris. Straight to the point. Can I have a Zoom meeting with you to discuss, please? Look, it's the modern world, right? Matthew, I'm sure you can underline this. We spend our life on Zoom these days. So wherever you are in the world, it's very easy for us to have a chat with you and talk you through these sort of options. And, how often are you on Zoom these days?
Yeah, very. Yeah, it seems to be the standard now. Instead of driving around, I seem to be just firing up the laptop every time I do a meeting. So most of my day is spent on Zoom.
Yeah, and look, it's a great way. There's no cost, right? So, likewise, we can come into your living room effectively remotely, tell you what you want to know, and if it's for you, we can help put a solution together. If it's not for you, then it's just a little bit of time that's taken to go through it. Okay, another question I've just got coming through on WhatsApp from Leslie, just asking about exchange rates. Basically, what is the what's the best way to contribute? Matt, this is probably one for you. We've got South Africans in a very volatile currency. How should they be contributing to something like this? What's your view on that?
So I would necessarily use someone like an FX provider. We've got a number of providers that we tend to use. They do give preferential rates to opposed to someone like your standard banks, for example. And effectively, I think the payment terms are quite flexible, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. As long as the clients are ahead of their schedule, we have a minimum amount per month. As long as they're ahead of their schedule, then that's perfectly fine.
Okay, all right, perfect.
And just on this is another point from, again, one of my clients sort of WhatsApping me now about, what's going on in the UK market at the moment about the stamp duty cut. So I can probably answer this one. So the question here, Dana, is that we saw stamp duty cut. It was actually a wheeze by the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak in the UK. He really saw the opportunity to try and settle everyone down over COVID. What's the best way to distract Brits from anything? Allow the Daily Express to do a headline about no stamp duty. So all of a sudden we all forgot about COVID in the UK and everyone started moving house. So lots of my friends and family and people that I know in the UK have upgraded and moved as a result of the stamp duty cut. It did cause us some challenges in the mortgage market for a little while, I have to say, as a byproduct, because everybody was either remortgaging or buying and selling their property. But that's kind of calmed down now. So we're back to sort of the norm where we were before. Stamp duty rate, which is effectively the transfer tax that you see in the UK, is back to where it was supposed to be. And the market is settling down. But, we've seen, regardless of that, significant strength and demand in the UK. Regardless of the infrastructure spend point that we touched on, you've got to look at the metrics that go on in the UK as a market. It's about the same population in the UK as it is South Africa. 60 odd million people. The only difference is 60 million people in the UK are crammed into an area the size of the Western Cape. So that really then puts a different dynamic on it. Then throw into that as well that everybody in the UK earns, the average earnings is, I think, something like 6 times what it is in South Africa. Nearly everybody has, basic qualifications. The vast majority of people have very good, well-recognized global educational degrees. So their earning potential is a lot higher. So you've got higher earnings, higher educational capability overall in a smaller space. And then on top of that, they've got these wonderful green belt planning laws, which stop people from just going up and building here, there, and everywhere. So that constricts supply. The UK has been significantly undersupplied for decades. That's why we see the charts like Matt showed right at the beginning there, why UK beats South Africa hands down time and time again. So regardless of whether you're looking in the Northern Powerhouse, you're looking at London, Halifax, other great regional cities in the north of the country, the prospects for growth is really, really good. And even if you look at the conservative projections that we have, sort of 4 or 5% a year growth, if you're leveraging that growth, we come back to the Robert Kiyosaki bit, which is, that it's multiples of that return, maybe 2, 3, 4 times the amount, depending on what the leveraging ratio is. But there we go. Matthew, have you got any questions from your clients? Anything that's popped up that you want to clarify before we wrap up? I'm conscious of the time. We've probably got a couple of minutes left before we finish up.
Yeah, so I just got asked on the mortgages and the mortgage providers that we use and how can clients get a mortgage in the UK now. To answer that question, obviously we've got Holborn mortgages that assist along the way. They'll take into a number of factors on your personal circumstances, but they'll look at the development and the property itself. And we'll assist basically in the end-to-end process. That's effectively where we come into the fold, is assisting and choosing and picking providers that are helping with the end-to-end service. So finding the mortgages, the lettings and management, the taxation, maybe even down to the resale. So it really is an easy process, and it's not really a hassle as an overseas landlord, as opposed to trying to do it yourself. So that's where we do really focus on it. But yeah, with regards to the mortgage process, our in-house mortgage team is pretty good.
Okay. Last couple of questions, then I'll just wrap up these two that are on the Q&A. So from Chris here. So is this being recorded? Yes, it is. Everyone will get a link to the recording. It'll be on our webpage tomorrow. That's normally the guys turn it around really quickly. So feel free to to share it. Udell, one last question for you here. So as a company, how many have Prosperity done? I assume that means developments. And is Prosperity a tried and tested method? What's your
yeah, definitely. So in regards to track record, and everyone's more than welcome to visit the Prosperity page and look at the About Us section. But we're a developer now. We've done 41 schemes since we've been going. That's 41 developments. For Birmingham, we've nearly done 2,500 units in Birmingham Central, in Birmingham City, which does make us Birmingham's largest homegrown residential developer on the ground, which is an amazing stand to have. But in regards to developments, we have a national approach. So we've developed as far as West Yorkshire, and as low as Southend-on-Sea in Essex. So we have a national approach, but we're always looking for that next regeneration story. We want to make sure that we do the research behind the sites to make sure that it is worth the while putting our clients into something, because we want them to come back again and again and build their wealth with us through our payment plans and everything that we do. So 41 schemes since we've been going, and we've nearly hit, I think it's something like 4,500 units as a developer, and that's in construction and completed.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We're going to wrap up there. We try and keep it to 45 minutes, and I'll leave with my Springer final thought that I often do on these property sessions. And it's really a story that I think helps solidify why primary currency investment property makes sense. I've got a client in Bishop's Court. He bought a lovely house in the 1980s for about 100,000 rand, and it's now worth 23 million rand. So when I tell that story to South Africans, they're like, oh, wow, great, good on him for buying it and what have you. He's still upset about the fact he also had the opportunity to buy a place in the UK, and not a place called Notting Hill, where the film was all about, for about £100,000 at the time, when the exchange rate was about 1 to 1. Okay, how much is the property on Zoopla? There's a website in the UK where you can check postcodes and see what properties are worth. It's worth 14 million pounds. Okay, that's 280 million rands at current exchange rate. So how many mansions has he lost out on by buying in South Africa 40 years ago, where he could have bought another 12 mansions? So let's take the currency out of it. Let's take inflation out of it. Let's talk about units of exchange as a house. If you're investing in just South Africa and not including some investment property overseas in your property portfolio, you could find that you're doing yourself out of 10, 11, 12 properties at some point in the future. So if in doubt, have a chat with Matthew, and he can put you in touch with providers like Udell and their unique offering, just to get you into that UK property market and get a foothold, so that you can take benefit of all those kind of adages. So thanks very much, everybody. Matthew, thank you for setting up. Udell, thank you very much for
having me.
Thanks, Mark.
Hey, have a great day. Thanks again. Cheers now.
Take care, guys. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.